He wasn't supposed to notice her. Not in a place like this. Not in the soft hum of a highway rest stop where engines idled low and coffee steamed in paper cups and families passed through without ever really seeing each other. But Rex stopped, mid-step, mid-breath, as if the air itself had changed direction. Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes felt the leash tighten in his hand, a subtle shift at first, then something firmer, rooted, immovable. "Easy," he murmured under his breath, more habit than concern. But Rex didn't ease. He didn't bark, didn't lunge. He simply stood there, muscles still, ears forward, amber eyes locked onto something Daniel hadn't even registered yet. The late afternoon light spilled across the concrete in long, golden lines, the kind that made everything feel quieter than it really was. A semi-truck rumbled past in the distance. A child laughed somewhere near the vending machines. The smell of gasoline mixed with sun-warmed asphalt hung low in the air. Ordinary. Completely ordinary. Except for the girl. She stood near the edge of the walkway, just beyond the reach of the shade canopy, small frame wrapped in a pale blue hoodie that looked a size too big. Maybe 8. Maybe younger. Her sneakers were scuffed. One lace untied. She wasn't crying. That was the first thing. No tears. No sound. Just stillness. Too still for a child her age. Daniel's eyes passed over her once, dismissing the image as background noise, another traveler waiting for someone. But Rex didn't move. The leash pulled tighter. "Rex," Daniel said, firmer this time. The dog's tail didn't wag. Not even once. That was wrong. Rex always softened around kids. Always. But now his body held a different kind of tension. Not fear. Not aggression. Recognition. Daniel followed the line of his dog's gaze again, slower this time. The girl's hands were at her sides. No, not quite. Her right hand twitched. Just once. Then again. Small. Controlled. Almost like she was trying not to be seen doing it. 3 movements. Pause. Then 3 again. Daniel blinked, unsure why that detail lingered in his mind. It meant nothing. It had to mean nothing. And yet Rex shifted his weight forward, one step closer, breath low and steady, as if listening to something beneath the surface of sound. A man stood a few feet behind the girl. Mid-40s, maybe. Clean clothes. Neutral expression. The kind of face you'd forget 5 seconds after seeing it. His hand rested lightly on the girl's shoulder, not tight, not forceful. Just there. Casual. Normal. Everything about it looked normal. But the girl didn't lean into it. Didn't acknowledge it. Her eyes stayed forward, unfocused, like she was watching something far beyond the parking lot. And then it happened again. 3 small squeezes of her fingers against the fabric of her sleeve. Pause. 3 more. Rex's ears twitched sharply. His head tilted just slightly, the way he did when a pattern clicked into place. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, subtle but undeniable. A discomfort without a clear source. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, almost to himself. The breeze picked up, carrying the faint scent of dust and distant rain. A car door slammed somewhere behind them. The world kept moving. But in that narrow slice of space between them and the girl, time seemed to slow, stretch thin. Rex took another step forward. Not pulling, choosing. Daniel didn't stop him this time. The girl's eyes flickered. Just once. And for a fraction of a second, they met Rex's. There was something in that look. Not fear. Not exactly. Something quieter. Something buried. A question that wasn't allowed to be asked out loud. The man's hand pressed slightly firmer on her shoulder. Still subtle. Still within the bounds of what anyone else would ignore. Anyone else but a dog trained to read what humans miss. Rex stopped again, directly aligned with her now. His body lowered just a fraction, weight centered, alert without threat. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He simply watched. And the girl's fingers moved again. 3. Pause. 3. Daniel exhaled slowly. A tension he hadn't noticed tightening now, impossible to ignore. "That's not nothing," he muttered. The sunlight shifted as a cloud passed overhead, dimming the scene just enough to make everything feel colder. The ordinary hum of the rest stop faded into the background, like a radio losing signal. Rex didn't look away. Not for a second. And somehow, Daniel knew. Neither could he. Before we begin, tell me, we're witching for drop your country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. Daniel did not move right away. And that was the first decision that mattered, because in places like this where nothing looked broken, the danger was never loud. It was quiet, tucked inside ordinary moments, disguised as routine, and Rex knew that better than most men ever would. His body still anchored in that invisible line between what was seen and what was felt, as breathing slow, controlled. Each inhale measured as if the air itself carried a message. And Daniel felt it now too, not as a clear thought, but as a weight pressing gently against his instincts, the kind that did not shout, but refused to leave, and he let the leash slacken just a fraction, enough for Rex to step forward again, careful, deliberate, closing the distance without drawing attention, because attention was the one thing that could shatter whatever fragile signal was being passed between that child and the dog. The girl's fingers moved again. 3 small presses against her sleeve, pause, then 3 more. Steady, repeated, not random, never random, and Daniel's mind searched for meaning. Something buried from training, something old, something simple, and then it brushed against it like a memory half forgotten, a pattern used when voices could not be trusted. When speaking meant risk, his jaw tightened slightly, not in alarm, but in recognition of possibility, and still he said nothing, because saying the wrong thing too soon could close a door that had barely opened. The man behind the girl shifted his stance, subtle, adjusting his weight from one foot to the other, his hand still resting on her shoulder, but now with a hint more presence. Not forceful, just enough to remind, just enough to guide, and his eyes flicked briefly toward Rex, then to Daniel, then away again, the kind of glance meant to appear casual, but lasting a second too long. And Rex noticed, of course he noticed, his ears angled slightly, catching not just sound, but intention, and Daniel followed the movement, letting his gaze drift, not fix, not challenge, just observe, the way he had been trained to do in places where everything depended on what was not said. A minivan pulled into the lot nearby, tires crunching softly over gravel. A mother called out to her kids. Laughter echoed and then faded. Life continued around them, unaware, untouched, and yet in this small pocket of space something else was unfolding, something fragile, something that required patience more than force. Rex took another step, now only a few feet from the girl, his posture softening just enough to seem non-threatening, but his eyes never leaving hers, and for a moment, the world narrowed to that connection, amber to gray, instinct to silence, and the girl's breathing shifted, barely noticeable, but there a slight hitch, as if her body had been holding something too long and now was unsure whether it was safe to release it. Her fingers stilled, then moved again, slower this time. 3 presses, pause, 3 presses. And Daniel felt it settle into place, not fully understood, but no longer ignorable, a signal, not for him, not for anyone else, but somehow Rex had caught it, translated it, carried it across that invisible line, and now Daniel stood at the edge of it, unsure whether stepping forward would break it or reveal it. "You see something I do not, do you?" he whispered, voice low, almost lost beneath the hum of the parking lot. And Rex's tail gave the faintest movement, not a wag, not comfort, but acknowledgement, as if to say yes and more. And Daniel exhaled slowly, grounding himself, because whatever came next would require precision, not reaction. The man's hand on the girl's shoulder shifted again, this time guiding her a half step forward, away from Rex, away from Daniel, subtle, practiced, and the girl's eyes dropped for a fraction of a second before lifting again, meeting Rex once more. And in that fleeting glance, there was something clearer now, not just a question, but a plea that had learned how to hide itself. And Rex lowered his head slightly, not in submission, but in focus, his entire body aligned with a purpose that had not been spoken aloud, and Daniel felt the moment. Stretched thin again, like a wire pulled tight, ready to either hold or snap, and he knew, with a certainty that came from years of trusting the dog beside him, that whatever Rex was about to do next, it would not be random, it would not be instinct alone, it would be choice, and that choice would change everything. The moment did not break, but it shifted almost imperceptibly, like a current changing direction beneath still water, and Rex made his choice, not with force, not with sound, but with something far more deliberate. He stepped closer to the girl, and then, unexpectedly, lowered himself to the ground, slow and controlled, front legs stretched forward, head resting just above his paws, a posture that softened his size, softened the space between them, and for anyone watching it would have looked like nothing more than a trained dog settling down. But Daniel knew better. This was not rest. This was invitation. This was Rex lowering the tension without releasing it, creating a pocket of safety where none had existed seconds before. And the girl felt it. That much was clear because her shoulders dropped just a fraction, her breathing loosened. And for the first time since Daniel had noticed her, she moved without restraint, her fingers no longer hiding against her sleeve, but shifting forward, brushing lightly against the fabric of her hoodie as if testing whether the moment would hold. And Rex did not move, did not rush. He simply stayed there, steady, patient, the kind of stillness that told the truth without speaking it. And Daniel mirrored that restraint, his posture relaxed but ready, his eyes scanning without locking, giving the illusion of ease while every instinct remained engaged. The man behind the girl exhaled sharply, almost too quietly to notice, but it carried a hint of irritation now, a disruption to whatever rhythm he had been maintaining. His hand pressed slightly firmer on her shoulder again, guiding, correcting, and the girl's body responded, not by pulling away, but by tightening, the brief softness retreating like it had never been allowed to exist. And Rex saw that too, his ears flicking back for just a second before returning forward, recalibrating, adjusting, because this was no longer just observation. This was communication unfolding in fragments. And then it happened, the smallest break in the pattern. The girl's hand moved again, but this time it was different, not 3 presses, not the repeated rhythm. Instead, she let her fingers slip briefly from her sleeve, and something small fell between them. A folded piece of paper, no larger than a receipt. It landed near Rex's paw, almost invisible against the concrete, and Rex reacted without reacting. His paw shifted just enough to rest over it. Not crushing, not drawing attention, simply covering, and Daniel felt his pulse slow rather than quicken, because this confirmed what had only been a possibility before. This was intentional. This was a signal meant to be caught, and Rex had caught it, not by chance, but because he had been listening in a way most people never learn to. Daniel took one step forward, casual, measured, closing the distance, as if adjusting his position for comfort rather than purpose. His boots making a soft scuff against the ground, just enough to justify his movement, and he let his hand drop loosely at his side, not reaching yet, not claiming what had been offered, because timing mattered, always. The man's gaze shifted again, sharper now, watching Daniel more closely, calculating, but still contained within the boundaries of normal behavior. Nothing overt, nothing that would draw immediate concern from anyone else passing by. And that was the danger, Daniel realized. Not the obvious, but the quiet confidence of someone who believed they would not be questioned. And the girl's eyes lifted once more, meeting Rex's, then flicking briefly to Daniel. And in that brief connection, there was something clearer now. Not just fear, not just hope, but trust, fragile and unspoken, placed carefully into a moment that could either hold it or break it. And Rex remained exactly where he was, his body a shield without aggression, his presence a statement without words. And Daniel understood. This was the opening, not wide, not safe, but real. And if he missed it, it might never come again. The air seemed to still around them. The distant sounds of the rest stop, fading into something softer, less defined, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see whether one quiet signal, caught by a dog, could be enough to change what came next. Daniel did not rush it, because rushing would turn something fragile into something broken, and whatever trust had been placed in that small piece of paper now resting beneath Rex's paw had been given carefully, not freely, and he respected that. So instead he shifted his weight again, subtle, natural, letting his movement blend into the rhythm of the rest stop. One more man, adjusting his stance in a place where no one paid attention for long, his eyes drifting briefly toward the vending machines, then back, never locking too hard, never challenging, but always aware, and Rex remained still, his body grounded, his paw lightly covering the folded paper, as if it were nothing more than a place to rest. But Daniel could see the precision in it, the exact placement, the control. Rex was not guarding it in the obvious sense, he was preserving it, holding the moment open just long enough for Daniel to step into it. And Daniel lowered himself slightly, not a full crouch, just enough to reach down as if to adjust Rex's collar. A routine motion, something he had done 1,000 times before, his fingers brushing briefly against the coarse fur at Rex's neck, then slipping lower, slow, unhurried, until they touched the edge of the paper. And in one smooth movement, he lifted it, folding it into his palm without looking at it, without breaking the illusion of normalcy. And Rex shifted his paw back into place, as if nothing had ever been there. Seamless, practiced, silent, and Daniel rose again, the paper now hidden against his hand, his expression unchanged, his breathing steady, because the moment did not end when the signal was received, it only deepened, and the man behind the girl noticed something. Not the paper itself, but the shift, the subtle alignment between Daniel and the dog, the kind of awareness that did not come from seeing but from sensing, and his posture tightened just enough to register. His hand on the girl's shoulder, guiding her again. This time with a slight urgency masked as direction, a half step backward, away from Rex, away from Daniel. And the girl followed, not willingly, not resisting, simply moving because she had learned that movement was safer than stillness when control did not belong to her. But her eyes, they stayed, flicking once more toward Daniel, toward Rex, holding for a fraction longer than before, and in that glance there was something new, a quiet hope that had not been there when this began, as if the act of being seen had changed something inside her, even if only slightly. And Daniel felt the weight of the folded paper in his hand, heavier than it should have been, not because of what it was, but because of what it might say, and he did not open it yet. Not here, not now, because opening it too soon could reveal more than he was ready to act on. And timing, again, mattered more than speed. A pickup truck rolled past, its tires crunching over gravel. A gust of wind followed, lifting loose debris across the lot, the sound briefly filling the space between them, and in that small cover of noise, Rex rose from the ground, smooth, controlled, stepping slightly to the side, repositioning himself just enough to remain between the girl and the open space beyond, not blocking, not confronting, simply present, a quiet boundary drawn without words. And Daniel took a small step back, creating space, releasing pressure, because pressure could cause a reaction, and a reaction was the last thing they needed right now. The man's eyes tracked him, sharper now, measuring, calculating, but still contained, still within that thin line of plausible normal. And Daniel met his gaze briefly, just enough to acknowledge, then let it pass, offering nothing, giving no reason for escalation. And the air shifted again, that same thin tension stretching across the moment. But now it carried something else beneath it, something that had not been there before, a sense that the balance had changed. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough that whatever came next would not unfold the way it had been planned. And Rex stood steady, ears forward, eyes alert, no longer just observing but holding the line. And Daniel knew, without needing to look, that the paper in his hand was not just a message. It was a doorway, and once opened, there would be no stepping back through it. Daniel did not wait any longer, because there's a moment in every situation when waiting stops being patience and starts becoming risk. And he felt that line now, thin but unmistakable, so he turned slightly, just enough to angle his body away from the man's direct line of sight, and with one control motion, he unfolded the paper inside his palm, shielding it with the natural curve of his hand, his eyes dropping only for a second, but that second was enough. The handwriting was uneven, rushed, the letters pressed hard into the paper, as if written under pressure, and it read simply, "Help me, he is not my dad." And for a heartbeat, everything else disappeared. The sound of engines, the distant voices, the wind moving across the lot. All of it fell away, leaving only that message and the quiet certainty that followed it. This was no misunderstanding, no overread instinct. This was real. And Rex had known it before the words ever existed in Daniel's hand. Daniel folded the paper. Again, just as quickly, slipping it into his pocket with the same casual motion he had used to retrieve it, his face unchanged, his breathing steady, because the situation had not escalated yet, not visibly, and keeping it that way was now his responsibility. Rex shifted his stance slightly, stepping half a pace forward, not aggressive, not blocking, but enough to keep that invisible boundary intact, and the girl noticed, her eyes flickering between Daniel and Rex. Something fragile but growing. In them, like a light that had been covered and was now finding its way through small cracks. The man's posture changed again, subtle but sharper now, his shoulders tightening, his gaze no longer drifting but settling. Watching Daniel with more focus, more awareness, as if sensing that something had shifted even if he did not know exactly what, and Daniel met that shift with calm, letting his hand rest loosely near Rex's leash, grounding himself in routine. Because routine disarms suspicion, he took one small step closer, not toward the man, but toward the girl, keeping his tone light, even the kind of voice used in everyday exchanges. "Hey there, buddy, looks like you made a friend," he said, nodding slightly toward Rex, his words simple, neutral, offering nothing that could be challenged, and the girl's lips parted just slightly, as if she wanted to respond, but no sound came out, only a breath, shallow but real, and Rex lowered his head again, just a fraction, softening his presence, inviting rather than pressing, and that small shift mattered because the girl's hand moved again, not the signal this time, but something more natural, her fingers brushing lightly against the air near Rex's ear, not quite touching, but close enough to feel his warmth, and Rex did not move away. He held still, steady, allowing that connection to exist without drawing attention to it, and Daniel saw it. That moment of contact, brief but undeniable, and he understood that whatever came next had to protect that, not break it. The man stepped forward slightly, closing the gap again, his voice entering the space for the first time, calm, controlled. "We need to get going," he said, his tone even, but there was something beneath it, something that did not quite match the surface, and the girl's body reacted immediately, her shoulders tightening, her hand pulling back, the brief openness closing again, and Rex's ears flicked forward sharply, catching the shift, not just in words but in tone, and Daniel felt it, too, that tightening of the moment, the edge of something about to change, and he knew he could not let them walk away, not now, not with what he knew, but he also knew that stopping them the wrong way could push everything into a direction he could not control. So he chose his next move carefully, stepping just slightly into their path, not blocking, not confronting, just enough to pause the movement, his posture relaxed, his expression neutral. "Hey, before you head out," he said, his voice still calm, still ordinary. "You mind if I ask her name?" And it was a simple question, harmless on the surface, but it landed differently in that space because it was not really about the name, it was about time, about creating a pause long enough for truth to surface, and the man hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But in situations like this, a fraction is everything, and Rex stood firm, silent, unwavering, his presence now no longer just observant, but intentional, as if he had already stepped into the moment Daniel was only beginning to shape. The hesitation did not last long, but it was long enough, and Daniel caught it, the slight delay before the man answered, the fraction of a second where certainty should have been immediate, and instead there was calculation, and that told him more than any word could have. The man's smile came next, thin, controlled, placed carefully over something else. "Her name is Lily," he said, his tone steady, almost too steady, like a line rehearsed more than lived, and Daniel nodded once, as if accepting it without question, but his eyes shifted, not to the man, but to the girl, because the truth was never in the answer, it was in the reaction, and Lily's gaze dropped for just a moment. Not dramatic, not obvious, just enough, and her fingers curled slightly at her side, a small tightening, a quiet contradiction, and Rex saw it too, his ears tilting forward, his body adjusting by inches, aligning with her rather than the man. And that alignment mattered, because it created a subtle division in the space, not visible, not confrontational, but real. Daniel took another small step, closing the distance just enough to shift the dynamic. His presence now part of their circle, whether invited or not. "Hey, Lily," he said gently, his voice lowering, softer now, no longer casual, but careful, intentional. "That is a strong name." And the girl's eyes lifted again, slowly this time, meeting his, and for a second there was hesitation, the kind that comes from weighing risk against hope. And then she gave the smallest nod, barely there, but enough to confirm what Daniel already knew. The name had not come from the man. It had come from her, and that changed everything. The man's hand tightened slightly on her shoulder, not enough to draw attention, but enough to remind, and his smile held, though it did not reach his eyes. "We really should get going," he said again, a touch more urgency beneath the surface now, and he shifted his weight forward, preparing to move, but Rex moved first, not fast, not aggressive, just one precise step that placed him directly in their path again, his body calm, his posture neutral, but immovable in its intent, and the moment tightened, the invisible line between normal and not normal becoming sharper, thinner, more fragile. Daniel felt it, that edge, and he knew this was the point, where silence could no longer carry them, but noise could still ruin everything. So he chose his words with the same care Rex had chosen his movements. "Actually," Daniel said, his tone still even, but now carrying a quiet authority beneath it, "I might need just a quick second," and he reached slowly toward his pocket, not sudden, not alarming, just deliberate, drawing out his identification, holding it where it could be seen without being forced into view. "Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes," he added, the name placed gently into the space, not as a threat, but as context, as truth, and the air shifted again, the man's eyes flicking briefly to the identification, then back to Daniel's face, measuring, recalculating, the balance changing in ways he had not expected, and Lily's breathing changed with it, subtle but real, a small release of tension that had been held too long, and Rex lowered his head just slightly, his presence softening again, but his position unchanged, still between, still holding that quiet boundary. And Daniel continued, his voice calm, steady. "Just want to make sure everything is all right here." And it was a simple sentence, but it carried weight now because it acknowledged what had been unspoken. It brought it just close enough to the surface without breaking it open. And the man exhaled slowly, his shoulders shifting as he adjusted to the new reality, the new variables. And for the first time, his confidence showed a crack, small, control, but there. And Daniel saw it, and Rex felt it, and Lily, standing between them, held on to it, that fragile space where something unseen was finally beginning to be seen. The crack did not widen all at once. It spread, quietly, like a fracture beneath glass that only revealed itself when the light hit it just right. And Daniel saw it now in the man's eyes, that shift from control to calculation, from certainty to adjustment, and it told him something important. Whatever story this man had prepared did not include interruption, did not include a uniform, did not include a dog that refused to look away, and that meant the balance had changed, not completely, not safely, but enough to open a path forward. If he moved carefully, the man straightened slightly, his hand easing on Lily's shoulder, not out of comfort, but out of awareness, as if he understood that too much pressure now would draw the wrong kind of attention. "Everything is fine," he said, his voice measured, controlled, the kind of tone meant to close a conversation before it could begin. But Daniel did not move, did not step back. He held his ground with the same quiet steadiness Rex had shown from the start, and Rex, sensing that, adjusted again, his body angling just enough to remain between Lily and the man without appearing to block him, his presence calm but absolute, and Lily felt it, her breathing unsteady but no longer frozen, her fingers twitching once at her side, not the signal this time, but something else, something closer to instinct, and Daniel lowered his voice slightly, soft enough that it did not carry far, but clear enough that it reached her. "Lily," he said, not as a question, not as a test, but as recognition, and her eyes lifted again, meeting his, and this time they held, not long, but longer than before, and in that moment something shifted inside her, something small but undeniable, like a door unlocking just enough to open a crack. The man noticed, of course he noticed, his posture tightening again, his gaze sharpening. "She is tired," he added quickly, stepping slightly closer to her, attempting to reclaim the space that had been quietly taken from him. But Rex did not yield. He remained exactly where he was, unmoved, unthreatening, but undeniably present, and the tension rose, not in volume, but in density, the air between them thickening with unspoken decisions. Daniel exhaled slowly, grounding himself, because this was the moment where everything could turn, not with force, but with truth, and truth, when handled wrong, could scatter just as easily as it could settle. So he shifted his focus again, not to the man, but to Lily, his tone gentle, steady. "Hey," he said softly, "you are okay." And it was not a question, not a prompt, just a statement, something to anchor her. And for a second, nothing happened. The world seemed to pause again, holding its breath, waiting. And then Lily moved, not dramatically, not suddenly, but with a quiet certainty that had not been there before. Her hand slipped free from the man's shoulder, just enough, just a few inches, and she took the smallest step toward Rex, toward Daniel. A movement so slight that anyone else might have missed it, but not them, never them. And that step said more than any words could have. The man reacted immediately, his hand reaching again, not rough, not forceful, but faster now, more urgent, as if trying to restore something that was slipping away. But Rex shifted with precision, a single step forward that placed him fully between them, his body still calm, still controlled, but now unmistakably firm, a boundary drawn not in aggression, but in decision, and Daniel saw it. That moment when instinct became action, when Rex stopped observing and started choosing, and it was enough, more than enough. Daniel's voice changed then, not louder, but clearer, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had made up his mind. "Sir," he said evenly, "I need you to step back for a moment." And the words settled into the space with weight, not force, but certainty, and the man froze just for a fraction of a second, caught between pushing forward and pulling back. And in that pause, that fragile, critical pause, everything hung in balance. The truth now no longer hidden, no longer just a signal, but something real, something present, something that could not be ignored any longer. The pause held, stretched thin across the space between them, and in that fragile silence the world seemed to lean in, as if even the distant hum of engines and the shuffle of passing footsteps understood that something unseen had just stepped into the light. The man's eyes flicked once more, not to Rex this time, but to Daniel, measuring, recalculating, searching for an angle that no longer existed. And Daniel did not move, did not raise his voice. He simply stood there, grounded, present, his hand resting loosely near the leash, his posture steady in a way that did not threaten but did not yield. And Rex mirrored that stillness, his body a quiet line drawn in the sand. Not aggressive, not tense, but absolute. And Lily, standing just behind him now, shifted her weight again, this time not backward, not toward the man, but closer to Rex, closer to the space that had been carved out for her, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered near the dog's fur. And then, slowly, carefully, she let them rest against his shoulder, just for a moment, just enough to feel something solid, something safe. And Rex did not move. He did not turn. He simply remained there, steady, as a post, allowing that contact to exist without making it bigger than it needed to be. And Daniel saw it, that small act, that quiet reaching. And he understood that this was the turning point, not loud, not dramatic, but final in its own way. The man exhaled again, longer this time, his shoulders dropping just slightly, as if releasing a tension he could no longer maintain, and his hand fell away from Lily's shoulder. Not abruptly, not with defeat, but with a kind of reluctant acknowledgement that the moment had shifted beyond his control. "I said everything is fine," he repeated, but the words no longer carried the same weight. They sounded thinner now, less certain, and Daniel nodded once, slow, measured, as if considering the statement. "I hear you," he replied calmly, his voice even, "but I still need you to step back." And there was no edge to it, no escalation, just a quiet firmness that left no room for negotiation. And for a second the man did not move, caught in that narrowing space between choice and consequence. And then, slowly, he took a step back, just one, but it was enough to break the proximity, enough to create distance where there had been none, and the air shifted again, lighter now, not safe, not yet, but moving in that direction. Daniel did not look away, did not relax. He held the moment steady, allowing it to settle rather than forcing it forward, and Rex remained exactly where he was, his presence still anchoring the space, still holding that invisible line. And Lily stepped forward again, this time without hesitation, closing the small gap between herself and Daniel. Her hand leaving Rex's shoulder only to hover briefly at her side before. She reached, not for Daniel, not yet, but for the edge of his sleeve, her fingers brushing against the fabric lightly, uncertain, and Daniel did not react immediately. He did not pull away or draw attention to it. He simply allowed it, the way Rex had allowed her touch moments before, because sometimes safety is not declared, it is felt, and Lily's breathing shifted again, deeper now, steadier. The tightness in her chest easing just enough to let air move freely, and the rest of the world began to return, the sound of a car door closing, the murmur of voices, the distant clatter of something dropped near the vending machines, all of it filtering back into place as if nothing had happened, as if this had been just another passing moment in a place built for passing moments. But Daniel knew better, and Rex knew better, and Lily, standing there between them, felt it too, that something had changed not just around her, but inside her, a small shift, a quiet reclaiming of space that had not belonged to her before. And Daniel finally moved, just a fraction, angling his body slightly so that Lily stood more clearly beside him rather than between him and the man, a subtle repositioning, but intentional, and Rex adjusted with him, stepping just enough to maintain that protective line. And for the first time since this had begun, the tension did not rise again. It settled, slowly, carefully, like dust after a storm, and in that settling there was something else, something quieter, something deeper, the kind of silence that does not come from absence, but from understanding. And Rex, still watching, still listening, lowered his head just slightly, as if acknowledging that the signal he had caught had been answered, not with noise, not with force, but with something far more fragile and far more powerful, a choice to see and a choice to stay. The evening light began to soften, stretching long shadows across the concrete as the rest stop slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. And in that fading glow the moment settled into something gentler, something that no longer needed to prove itself. Daniel stood still for a while, not because he had to, but because leaving too quickly would break what had just been rebuilt, and beside him Lily remained close. Her small hand now resting lightly against the fabric of his sleeve, no longer hesitant, no longer pulling away, just there, present in a way she had not been before. And Rex stayed at her other side, his body relaxed now, but his awareness never fully dimmed, his ears catching the distant sounds, his eyes still moving, still reading the space as if the world itself spoke in signals only he could understand. A patrol unit arrived quietly, not with urgency, not with noise, just a presence, the kind that blends into the background until it is needed. And Daniel exchanged a few low words, simple, clear, nothing dramatic, just enough to pass along what mattered. And the man who had stood behind Lily was no longer part of the moment, not because of force, but because the truth had quietly shifted the ground beneath him. And sometimes that is all it takes, not confrontation, not chaos, just a single thread of reality pulled into the light, and everything else begins to unravel on its own. Lily was guided gently toward the safety of the patrol car, but before she stepped away, she paused, her fingers tightening slightly on Daniel's sleeve, just for a second, as if anchoring herself to something she did not yet know how to name. And Daniel looked down at her, his expression softening in a way that had nothing to do with training or duty. "You are safe," he said quietly, the words simple, but grounded in something deeper than reassurance. And she nodded, not fully understanding, not yet, but believing enough to take the next step. And when she moved, Rex moved with her. For a moment, just a few steps close, enough that she could feel him there, steady, silent, And then he stopped because his part in this had already been written before anyone else understood it, and he had followed it without hesitation, without question, the way he always did. Daniel watched as Lily settled into the seat, a blanket placed gently around her shoulders, her small frame finally allowed to rest without tension, and for the first time since he had seen her, her eyes closed, not in fear, but in something closer to relief, and Rex sat beside Daniel again, his body lowering onto the cool concrete, the last of the sunlight catching the edges of his fur, turning it briefly into gold. And Daniel exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carries weight out with it. Not all of it, but enough to make space for something else, something quieter. He reached down and rested his hand on Rex's head, fingers pressing lightly into the familiar warmth. "You saw it," he murmured, not expecting an answer, but knowing one had already been given, and Rex did not move, did not react. He simply remained there, steady as ever, because for him it had never been about seeing, it had been about listening, about catching what others missed, about answering signals that never made a sound. The patrol car door closed with a soft click, the engine started, and slowly it pulled away, carrying Lily toward something safer, something better, and Daniel stood there for a moment longer, watching until the vehicle disappeared beyond the curve of the road, and the rest stop returned fully to its ordinary state. Cars coming and going, people passing through, unaware of what had just unfolded in the quiet space between seconds, and Rex rose again, stretching once, his body resetting as if preparing for whatever came next, and Daniel gave the leash a gentle tug. Not to lead, but to move together, because that is how it always worked, side by side, one seeing what the other could not, one trusting what the other felt. And as they walked away, the last light of day fading into something softer, something still, there was a sense that lingered in the air, not loud, not spoken, but present, the kind of truth that does not need to be explained to be understood, that sometimes the most important cries are the ones that never leave a voice, and sometimes it takes a soul trained to listen in silence to hear them and answer. In this gripping cinematic tale, a U.S. Marine and his loyal German Shepherd K9 uncover a silent cry for help hidden in plain sight, turning an ordinary highway stop into one of the most unforgettable animal stories ever told. When a young girl sends a signal no one else can see, only the trained instincts of a battle-tested dog recognize the danger, proving once again why the bond between soldier and K9 stands at the heart of the most powerful animal stories. As tension quietly builds, the Marine relies not on force, but on patience, awareness, and trust in his dog's intuition, revealing a deeper layer of emotional storytelling that defines truly meaningful animal stories. Without chaos or violence, the situation unfolds through subtle movements, unspoken fear, and a quiet act of courage that shifts everything, showing how even the smallest signal can change a life when someone chooses to listen. A hallmark of the most impactful animal stories, guided by loyalty, instinct, and an unbreakable connection. The German Shepherd becomes more than a companion, becoming the voice for someone who cannot speak, reinforcing why audiences continue to be moved by authentic animal stories that reflect trust, protection, and silent heroism. In the end, this story reminds us that not all cries are heard with ears. Some are felt through presence, through patience, and through the kind of bond only a Marine and his K9 can share, making this one of those rare animal stories that lingers long after the moment has passed.